Mrs. Armitage on wheels. Mrs. Armitage was out on her bicycle. Breakspear the dog ran alongside. A hedgehog walked across the road. Tring, tring, went Mrs. Armitage on the bell. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is a really loud horn. Mrs. Armitage bought 3 horns. They were all very loud. Beep, beep, honk, honk, went Mrs. Armitage on her horns. Then the chain came off. By the time Mrs. Armitage had got it on again, her hands were all black and greasy. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is somewhere to wash your hands. So she got a bucket of water and a towel and a soap rack with a bar of soap, and she hung them all on the bike. And off she went with beautifully clean hands. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, if it is to be looked after properly, is a complete toolkit. So she got a toolbox with spanners and screwdrivers and hammers and cans of penetrating oil, and she fixed it onto the back of the bike. By now, Mrs. Armitage was starting to think about food. What this bike needs is somewhere to carry a light snack, said Mrs. Armitage. So she got a tray for apples and bananas and cheese and tomato sandwiches and a holder for a bottle of lemonade and a flask of cocoa and a special basket for bones and dog biscuits for Breakspear, and she fixed them all to the bike. By now Breakspear was feeling tired. You could tell this because his tongue was hanging out and he was panting. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is something for a faithful dog to ride on. So she got some iron brackets and some nuts and bolts and some cushions, and she made a seat for Breakspear, and off they went. They had stopped by the road for some sandwiches and some dog biscuits when it began to rain. Great heavens, said Mrs. Armitage. What this bike needs, Breakspear, is something to keep the rain off. So she got 2 umbrellas, one large and one small, and she fixed them onto the bicycle, and off they went. Riding through the rain, Mrs. Armitage began to feel rather downhearted. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is a bit of cheerful music. So she got a radio cassette player and a lot of cassettes and a mouth organ, and she fixed them to the bike. Mrs. Armitage was turning the pedals so fast and blowing the mouth organ so hard she was exhausted. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is a little extra oomph. And so she got some wood and some ropes and some tarpaulin. She rigged up a mast and a sail, and she added a few yards of bunting and an anchor into the bargain. And off they went into the wind, and the wind behind them, faster and faster, until crash, crunch, clang, clatter, thud. What this bike needs, Breakspear, Mrs. Armitage said as she picked herself from the wreckage, is taken to the dump. And what I need is whoopee! But what these roller skates need, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, what these roller skates need is